Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you will hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Well, we're back with another episode of The Singles and so much to cover. And of course, as always, it is powered by the wonderful data we get from Tracksuit. So we have our views, we have our opinions, and we're not afraid to share them, but we are backed by data. And of course, these episodes are in partnership with Tracksuit, the always on affordable brand tracking dashboard. And it's an amazing, powerful platform for you to use for brands that really, maybe before this has been out of your reach or you've been doing this once or twice a year. Now brand tracking can be always on for you, your brand, your entire organization. You can share the dashboard, you can share the knowledge across the organization, and people can see the impact of not just brand campaigns, but the entire organization in terms of your funnel, your brand health statements. It is really, really incredibly powerful to use. And of course, the team at Tracksuit are standing by and waiting to hear from you. So go to gotracksuit.com and find out how to get in touch with the team. And I leave Dan and Jasper's contact details in the show notes, so you can go track them down as well. And it's not just for brand side marketers, of course. If you are an agency as well, they're partnering with agencies across markets: UK, Australia, New Zealand, France, Germany, Canada, US, and of course Ireland. And it is a dashboard that is out there and is ready to be used for everybody. Well, listen, if you are enjoying That's What I Call Marketing and can rate or review episodes, it really is a powerful way for us to reach a new audience. Algorithms are changing all over the place. You might have seen stuff from Fergus O'Carroll on LinkedIn recently where he was questioning how his organic posts are not getting any reach anymore. And it's not from his page, it's from his personal account. It is harder and harder to reach people. And so if you can help us by sharing an episode, reposting something you see on LinkedIn, or rating or reviewing, it is a great way for us to reach a new audience. Well, with all of that said, let's get into today's wonderful episode of The Singles, brought to you by Tracksuit. Dan and Jasper, great to see you. How are you getting on?
Hey, Connor. Good,
hey,
thanks.
Connor. Yeah, good. How are you?
I'm
good.
Fresh back from a Greek holiday, so I'm sure I'm firing on all cylinders.
Yeah. I thought I noticed a suntan there. Yeah, looking good, Dan. Looking good. Well, listen, we've lots happened when you were away, Dan. So we'll catch you up. But lots of stories to talk about. The first one I want to touch on. It's kind of been interesting the last couple of weeks. There's been some new people in new roles talking about maybe not a new topic. So we've got the new CMO of Indeed. He's there a while. He's there a couple of months. Comes from a B2B, like an enterprise B2B background. And he's come in and he said, that he's going to pull back from big media and expansive SEO and try, focus on storytelling and maybe using more of the organic channels that they have. And then we've got Diageo's interim CEO that's come in and said they need to move away from a vicious cycle of spend, chasing, growth, but cutting, right? So we want growth, but we want to cut.
Yeah.
And looking over, I think it's over 3 years, it's like $625 million to try kind of find cuts. Like, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Now, it's maybe not all in marketing, but marketing is definitely called out as an area where you'll find those cuts. And that is not new news for any marketer, right? A new CEO, a new CMO comes in and starts talking about, we need to do things radically differently, but we're going to cut some of the bigger areas of spend, like expansive media spend or, just general marketing budgets. I mean, look, it's not to say either a right or wrong. Like, if there was a right or wrong answer, there'd be a book and we'd all just follow it and this would be the easiest job in the world. And it's not. So you can understand it, but there's probably some risks with the approach that they both kind of highlighted. Slightly different, but kind of in the same territory.
Yeah, no, completely. It does feel like one of those very familiar stories that we always revisit, whether it's a change in leadership or it's economic challenges. How do we go back to protecting the bottom line, driving efficiency? Brand gets thrown around as a bit of a nice to have in whatever format. How do we start going back to high ROI channels? I think that they're both really interesting examples because the Diageo one makes a really conscious effort to call out how we're going to hold on and protect brand. And we know that there will be a point to which we need to balance how we drive efficiency so that we don't go too far and lose that long-term brand building.
Yeah.
And And then also focusing, as you always see, like what are the non-core product assets that we're going to divest and kind of streamline our product portfolio to our big winners. I think they called out Johnny Walker and Guinness and others, versus Indeed, where it seemed like it was a bit more drastic around, hey, we're going to remove the view of like mass reach and think
Yeah.
really drive like more towards AI efficiency. And so I think that what's coming out of that that's quite interesting is it brings us back to the same story. It's about consistency, and it's about how does effectiveness essentially drive, or long-term brand building drive your efficiency long-term. And coming back into that conversation of this isn't about or, it's about and. Absolutely, when times are tough, how do you make sure that you're targeting or indexing in your high ROI audiences and products? But fundamentally, you've got two jobs to be done. It's like, yes, you absolutely need to be efficient in converting buyers who are ready now versus building the platform of long-term demand so that you're efficient next year and in the third year and in the fifth year. So it is, I feel like it is a very familiar story, but now the introduction is how do I utilize AI and how do I focus on channels that drive cultural relevance, as opposed to also just fundamentally, making sure that you're building long-term demand in the most mass reach, mass audience ways that you can.
And like Indeed, look, people probably know, or if they don't, I worked at Indeed. So, I was there during a period where we did see the benefits of mass reach, like a market like Germany, where Indeed was so challenged and, really wasn't resonating. And, a couple of things really worked for them. One was a big sponsorship that they really activated brilliantly. And then the second was an amazing piece of advertising that ended up, there was a character created out of it, and she became like the face of Indeed for about 5 years, to the point where she like couldn't get any work. So she was like, I need to not be the face of Indeed anymore. But like really good, and it was about reach, right? It was about that mass reach. And so, look, they've, and again, it's out there in public domain. They've made serious amounts of cuts, redundancies. I think they've had 3 rounds, if not 4. And so, is this a move to kind of where else can we cut? But yet they've announced a few sponsorships in the UK. So it's kind of, it's very interesting dynamic that you're seeing. And again, the focus on, more of the owned channels as well. You have to pay, like, unfortunately, like the algorithms don't love just, organic reach. It's just not the thing it was.
Completely. And you're also just paying to actually make sure that organic social and content is still high quality to be able to far reach on channels anyway. So yeah, it does feel like it's going to come back to a blend, a mix of channels fundamentally. But sometimes these conversations ignore that product innovation is also what's required as things change, and both are obviously very high top of funnel brands. And so if we're trying to think about bottom of funnel conversion, there is a huge product component of like, what do buyers need right now when it comes to recruitment? And so how does product also play into that whole future view of efficiency as well?
Yeah, I think, and also just taking then, I suppose, then another view back to the Diageo side of things. I think one thing that really stood out to me was Diageo's interim CEO explicitly saying that their cost measures were taken without damaging long-term brand health. Now, historical evidence shows the risk of cutting too deep. This was first demonstrated in a study by Roland Varley, who tracked 200 companies. This was during the 1923 recession. And those who maintained advertising were 20% ahead of pre-recession levels, while those who cut fell 7% behind. So we can see that strategic investment beats blanket cuts, essentially. And, this is where brand tracking becomes essential. And it's, of course, what we champion at Tracksuit, as brands can see where consumer perceptions are shifting, which parts of their marketing strategies are delivering the most impact, and really where their investment works hardest. So essentially ensuring every penny counts while protecting long-term brand equity. Now, obviously, as we touched on, it's well documented that when businesses face financial pressure or review spending, marketing budgets are often among the first to be reduced. But if competitors are cutting too, brands can really stand out by maintaining brand investment and achieving higher cut through with less spend. So in our Tracksuit article, Marketing and Economic Downturns, Why You Shouldn't Cut Brand Investment, where through studies and backed by data, essentially we highlight the importance of demonstrating that brand building has a measurable return on investment, just like other forms of marketing. So essentially it's about spending wisely to maximize ROI. And interestingly, the Harvard Business Review found a consistent pattern, and that was that 80% of companies that cut marketing costs in past downturns hadn't regained pre-crisis sales 3 years later. And those who cut deepest only had a 21% chance of pulling ahead afterwards. So smart, measured investment pays off. And this is exactly why we built the Tracksuit budget calculator, which perhaps we can link in the show notes.
Yeah.
Ultimately helps brands assess whether their marketing budget strategy strikes the right balance between performance marketing, brand building. So ultimately brands can save costs without compromising long-term growth. As we know, great brands build great businesses, and long-term health is the foundation for sustainable growth.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. The other thing as well, you're looking here to global brands, right? And that's such a challenge as well, because I don't know, and again the detail, like, are they then looking at kind of the markets as well, and kind of saying, well, we'll focus on 5 or we'll focus on 50, or how is that going to play into it? So that could be more nuance to what they're going to do as well. It's kind of say, well, there's going to be like a market focus that we know, but then some of the markets as well, they'll have such high penetration that maybe the growth isn't going to come from some of those bigger markets, but future growth will come from new entering into new markets, but that's expensive.
And I think that the push towards how do we drive efficiency is going to forever be the conversation, and rightly so. Like, if you are retargeting the same audience that's just completely saturated, and that makes a lot of sense to revisit, okay, how do we cut bloated spend and become more efficient that way? It's just about, for these two very extremely large companies, how they think about efficiency and effectiveness is very different to your normal brands. And so I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with thinking about efficiency, but then how does it ensure that it doesn't become how do we cut brand spend long term, and rather how do we complement them both to make sure that we are constantly being as efficient and effective as possible. I don't know, did you get that sense kind of from the Indeed article that it was about efficiency in the sense of cutting brand budget versus about thinking about channels that they would invest in with brands still being at the forefront?
Well, so the impression I got was probably a bit of both. I think what I found really interesting about the article was early on it talked about that kind of media spend, and I'll try to find it here, like pull back from big media. Like it says pull back from big media. You're like, okay, like that, like big media is, it's TV, it's out of home. But let's say they've just signed a couple of sponsorships in the UK with football teams. They've extended their Eintracht Frankfurt in Germany. So that kind of goes against it, but those things could have been in play before this, right? And just the announcements. So that to me was like a few words that were really telling. But yet then the rest of the article went on to talk about, efficiency and own channels and AI and, all the things you might expect in channels efficiencies. But I was just like, wow, that's those few words. Like if you're in the media and advertising team, they cut deep.
Completely. And without trying to harp on it too much around the end conversation, but essentially you just, what that can result in is fundamentally like you're impacting the efficiency and the demand building in 2 years' time, and you're kind of just pushing the problem down the road. The next 12 months in some ways.
I think as well, like it highlights a point that, again, I know we've touched on previously, and it's just essentially it's the importance of data-driven decision making. And ultimately, if these strategies or these sort of revised plans are being built off the back of data that supports that direction strategically, i.e., is that through consumer intel or data that's being received? Connor, you highlighted a really good point a minute ago about market nuanced, and is this sort of market specific versus is this just a blanket global rollout that might see performance increase in some markets, but it might see efficiencies drop in others? So I think ultimately, and from our side of things, this is what we're finding with brands that we support in a multi-market capacity is it's ultimately having a view per market and acknowledging those cultural nuances, but ensuring that those strategic directions are backed by data. And it's almost providing brands with that sort of view and fingers on the pulse of what's happening in category in that market to help support whether or not that is something that will land. And again, back to the efficiency point, almost sort of help drive and increase that.
Yeah, and again, look, I'm sure they will, but the hope, I guess, for any of this is that the cuts don't happen too deep, too fast, and too hard that it's hard to pull back from. Because in 2 or 3 months, the cuts you make could take you 6, 9, 12 months to get back, and by the time you're seeing that dip, you could potentially do a lot of damage. So definitely one to watch from both, and it'd be interesting even over time to kind of maybe dip back in 6 months and go, well, what's the data tell us? Like, can you see anything, with yourselves on it?
And it does feel like the brands that get this right will really benefit of if they can capitalize on strong demand, brand building now in this tough economic environment when others are slightly pulling back, plus thinking about how does like consumer behavior change in terms of search and SEO and get that mix right. It does feel like you can create a lot of space for yourself versus the competition in the next 24 plus months. But it is two very like the familiar, how do we think about efficiency, then with this new whole blend of how do we think about how people find products, buy products at the same time. Pretty difficult to navigate.
But I just recently set up a ChatGPT alert for somebody who's looking for a job. Like I'm not on Indeed. I'm using ChatGPT. Deliver me new roles in this category, this with these criteria every day, and then I can go and it might bring me to a site, or I'll go now. Like there, do you know what I mean? So I don't need the platform. Like again, that's the Indeed specific example, but it's they're very different, but it's kind of interesting. Well, right, we'll keep an eye on that one and come back to it. If you want to find out more about Tracksuit, go to gotracksuit.com and find out how they can be your affordable, always on brand tracking dashboard. The next one that was really interesting, just I guess it's kind of been a bit of a narrative over the last while, and it keeps popping up, but it popped up a couple of weeks ago, is Brewdog. And so the darling of craft beer, it just seems to be on a bit of it's just not going right for them at the moment, is it? It just seems to be, is it culture? Is it trends? Is it people not liking the product, or is it something else? But what's your data telling us about Brewdog?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, the headlines from recent coverage in the press paint a pretty bleak picture. I mean, if we look at the beer category as a whole, it's large, it's competitive. It currently has 66% of UK adults falling into it, which is approximately 34.7 million people on average over the past year who have qualified in. Now, the category itself is on the rise. So what we're seeing is it's up 5 percentage points year on year, which equates to roughly 3 million more people saying they purchased beer in the last 3 months. Now, the age breakdown across the category is fairly even, with the exception of Gen Z. So 18 to 24-year-olds make up just 9% of the category. Now, as we know and have covered in previous episodes, Gen Z and younger demographics are increasingly swerving alcohol altogether. Although what's interesting is when I looked at Brewdog's funnel performance in the alcohol-free beer category, the picture wasn't much better. So among 18 to 34s, awareness is down 8 percentage points and consideration is down 9%. So looking back at the core beer category and across all demographics over the past year, Brewdog is quite clearly in decline. So awareness is down 6 percentage points. Consideration is down 6 percentage points, which is around 1.3 million fewer people considering the brand. Preference is stable at 7%, but with top of funnel and mid funnel metrics falling, future growth obviously looks quite unstable. And for comparison, Guinness leads the set with 16% preference, followed by Peroni at 13%. And when we zoom in on the 35 to 44 age group, who make up nearly a fifth of category buyers, the situation is slightly more alarming. So the category overall here is booming. So that's up 14 percentage points. But for Brewdog, consideration is down 14 percentage points. Claimed usage has collapsed down 24 percentage points. And preference is down 12%. So I think what's important to remember here as well is that, and what makes this particularly telling, is that this group were Brewdog's original fans and consumers when they launched back in 2007, and now they're seemingly the ones turning away the fastest.
It's a fascinating reversal of fortune. And do you know what's really interesting? You talk about the 0-0. Like, I think I think their non-alcoholic IPAs probably is one of the best
Mm,
products.
yeah.
Personally, like I think it's a really, really strong
Agreed. Yeah.
product, but it's just, people just don't see Brewdog as the product for them, right?
Yeah.
Like that's in decline.
Yeah, completely. And I think importantly, and this is where we touched on earlier, I mean, this is ultimately where brand tracking does play a critical role, as ultimately it allows brands to spot warning signs in consumer sentiment, funnel performance before they show up in sales, which in Brewdog's case, according to reports, resulted in a pre-tax loss of 36.6 million for the 2024 financial year, with growth of less than 1% year on year. Now, that said, earlier this year, Brewdog did rebrand for the first time in 5 years in what their COOs called the start of a new era for Brewdogs. And to your point, Connor, I mean, looking at our data, Brewdog does still score well on innovation. So with 40% of active consumers agreeing, putting them ahead in the category, in fact. And they also score strongly on it's really on the way up, with 33% of those aware of the brand agreeing. But the challenge is that these perceptions aren't yet converting into action further down the funnel. So
Yeah,
I think it'll be interesting to see whether this shift starts showing up in their brand health metrics and ultimately, how it will play out across the wider category over time.
and you'd wonder, like, obviously there've been other kind of things in the news in the recent past about kind of culture and stuff like that. Do you think that, how would we know? But like, has that had potentially just that damaging effect on the brand where people are like, yeah, like I have an alternative, like, you know what I mean? I can get something else. Why am I supporting this brand that seems to be really horrible to people?
Yeah.
I think it's difficult to say, but it does. You can start to like line things up with the aging audience that saw Brewdog through its glory years versus the more recent, younger Gen Z to millennial audience that weren't there for that growth story. And how do you the co-founders have now stepped away, and
Yeah,
I think
that's interesting, isn't it?
James Watt's the captain and co-founder, but they've brought in a new C-suite, and so it's almost like redesigning how does Brewdog look for the audiences that didn't see it through its scale up to mass challenger brand era.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, we touched on that a previous episode around how do you divorce brands from personal co-founder brand to product brand as well, and that can be a challenging thing, as we've seen with Elon. And
yeah. But I think though, sorry, just quickly to the point, because I think it is a really interesting point, and I'm sure, again, obviously, as you say, it's obviously difficult to directly attribute that to, say, kind of collapse in sentiment. However, when we are seeing only 21% of people aware of Brewdog saying it's for people like me, and only a quarter of people saying it's a brand I trust, you can quite clearly start to understand as to how those sorts of, whether you call it a cultural moment or those sort of aspects that hit trade press, can have a domino effect into how a consumer kind of is perceived and feels to a brand, i.e., you hear about the culture of a company being a relatively toxic workplace. Does that then incentivize you when you are out in the pub or at a bar or going to the shop to get some beers? Is that something that subconsciously can play into thinking, actually, that's probably a brand I want to steer a little clear on, because you start to build those sort of negative connotations with it?
Yeah, 100%. And then the other thing, again, was kind of touching at the start is, they're up against big players, right, in the market, like, AB and Bev. You got obviously Diageo.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a good opportunity for them now, Diageo cutting. But then I was wondering, I was like, I wonder, and I haven't seen anything on it. Like, was there any moment where there was an offer made to Brewdog to become, to be bought out by one of these big breweries, and would that might that have been the right play for them? Again, I don't know, I've no idea, but you kind of get a sense that maybe that's what's needed now. Are they going to be able to, carrying those losses, are they going to be able to redefine what it is and what Brewdog means in enough, like it's been delisted from hundreds of pubs across the country. Like they're up against it.
And you could also say that the counter view could be like, should Brewdog be looking to acquire fast growing brands themselves that appeal to the audience that they're under indexing in and can't building relevance? But yeah, I think they're also facing the mass competition of, I think the Diageo article also called out that they're performing extremely well on the non-alcoholic brand side of the category side of things. And they're centralizing and their product portfolio into their highest performing beer and spirit brands. So then you're kind of getting this concentration from the behemoths, but then you've got these fast growing scale ups like Jubel that perform extremely well with Gen Z and millennials. And so where does Brewdog find itself amongst the competition stack?
Yeah, and what's that other one? The Lucky Saint. That's another one like that. That seems to be doing well. Which, to me, like that kind of suggests that the opportunity is still there, because Lucky Saint is kind of feels a bit disruptory and feels a bit Brewdoggy, to be honest, in a non-alcoholic way. So yeah, it's interesting. Well, look, we wish them well, and it's never easy when you're at that moment. But maybe this is where creativity and innovation will disrupt through and help them kind of get to the next stage of growth for what is a lovely brand. Like they did something really interesting in the category.
Absolutely,
completely.
In the face of so many big competitors, incredible.
It's really
the original rebels,
the original rebels, exactly. And famously, John Evans was CMO for 3 months.
Oh yes, that's right.
Of course.
Well, on to something very different. And we were immediately emailing each other when the news broke that Travis and Taylor got engaged. It was just the joy and the happiness we all felt, a collective sigh of relief. But it's a really interesting one here, because you've got like a massive brand in Taylor Swift. You've got a massive brand in the Kansas City Chiefs. Travis, less of a massive brand, but becoming what will be a massive brand. And you guys track global brands like Taylor Swift. So tell me a bit about Taylor Swift's brand health metrics.
Well, I think we could coin this as the royal wedding in the US. I have to say, Love Story is my favorite Swift song for one of her original albums or early albums. But it is. We could end the episode with that song wrapping things up. But no, we track Taylor Swift, Ed Sheeran, a few sports brands as brands, and the way that we can describe it, which sounds probably pretty horrible to describe a relationship as a brand collaboration. As someone who is recently married, that's probably not something like a great collab. But it is quite interesting to see, like when we track Taylor Swift in the US and the Chiefs, their awareness are incredibly high top of funnel. So I think Taylor Swift sits nearly universally at 95%, the Kansas City Chiefs at 83%. But what gets really interesting is when you start to get to the bottom of funnel and looking at those metrics, how they are so dominant. And so Taylor has 50% consideration around women, focused on women, and then at the preference level, 14% nationally representative and 19% for women. When you think of all the different pop stars and sports franchises, for her to hold near 20% for female respondents is pretty incredible. And then equally comparing that to the Chiefs, their consideration within the NFL is the highest at 30%, which you have to argue that a team based out of Kansas City is largely being driven by, or significantly driven by, Taylor's involvement. And then their preference level sits at 10%. And so there really was this Swift effect of like, how did we see Kansas City?
Nicely done.
Thank you. Metrics grow off the back of their relationship. And it's now that brought them in line with the Dallas Cowboys holding 10% preference within NFL franchises of brands, which is absolutely incredible. And equally, like rolling off the back of this, we've seen nearly 330 million, as reported from Apex Marketing, in brand value created between Taylor Swift and the Kansas City Chiefs, which is just an extraordinary, if this was a tactical decision, it was one of the great investments. But I think purely built on love, what a great secondary result.
Beautifully said.
But it is like, I was thinking about when we were talking about like earlier around how do you index on audiences, and what this has allowed of like Taylor Swift becoming more involved with the Chiefs is actually allowing that franchise to then access this phenomenally engaged, like tribal audience that she has built so incredibly around Gen Z, millennial, female audiences. That, how does Kansas City Chiefs unlock that audience themselves? And this has just created such an incredible opportunity for them to connect to a fan base and audience base that they really hadn't been exposed to, which is obviously a lesson of how do you like index and win at the audiences that you do so well, but then also how do you find the right collaborations to unlock the audiences that you're underplaying in.
And I think as well, like it's interesting, and I suppose somewhat follows on from as we touched on in Brewdog, which is almost what are sort of the byproducts of these cultural moments on brand health. And obviously this is a completely different situation and context, but the fact that, as Dan just pointed out, the fact that we are now starting to see the Chiefs and the NFL at large appealing to segments that they weren't over-indexing in before, and almost sort of drawing in broader appeal and resonating and connecting with demographics that perhaps weren't within that kind of consideration set previously, obviously just goes to show the, I suppose, sort of the bigger impact and the broader impact that these things can have on, and ultimately on, consumer sentiment.
Yeah, like it is, and as you say, like this is a different, collaboration, but it goes, there's a good thing in it where you kind of think, right, if you're trying to reach an audience that aren't engaged, like, are there collaborations that help you get in front of it, and I think that's smart. I just think the impact of it is insane. I mean, she's just literally has to be the biggest star in the world, and it's it's a fascinating one, and it'll only I think get bigger, as you say, the royal wedding of the US, like what's going to happen when that, that happens, because all the stars will be there, and it's a fascinating one. I actually got to see a Super Bowl ring.
You did?
Kansas City.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So I met Lara Krug, who's the CMO of the Kansas City Chiefs, and she has one. So everybody gets
awesome.
one. Everyone who's working in the organization, they're amazing. Like it's nuts, like how the detail that goes into it. I think there's a program that shows how some of them get made, but it was amazing.
You didn't ask to try it on, did you?
No. That wasn't
that would be a really interesting conversation to have, though, is that like this opportunity, this collaboration kind of like came to the Chiefs, and then how do you make sure that you're still owning your brand story, but then maximizing this relationship that you haven't proactively invested in, but is like, how could you not bring in Taylor Swift into the Chiefs story?
So I do think that that is a fascinating thing with properties like the NFL, even Taylor Swift aside, because they have so many stars in their ranks, and how do you, as a CMO for a franchise, own the narrative, utilize the stars that you have there, but not get derailed by the things that they might do, it's just it's tough. So I have asked, I'm hoping I can get Laura on at some point. She said yes in person, probably knowing that she could just then ignore me forever.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. Well, listen, we'll obviously report back from the wedding when we're there. It's the last one we want to touch on, because it was like one of the big stories the last couple of weeks. We don't have data on it because it's too early, but Gordon Ramsay, Burger King, and a Wagyu burger, and it's everywhere. Probably a really unexpected brand celebrity collaboration, I think. Definitely didn't see that one coming. And I think BBH done a really wonderful job with the creative. I think it's good, it's enjoyable, it's real Ramsey, but well branded for Burger King. So all the things you'd worry about for those celeb collabs, they've managed to knock that one out of the park. But there's been mixed reaction to the actual product, and they've done some great partnerships with TikTok foodies, and there's one guy, I can't remember his name, but Gordon Ramsay then walks into the Burger King as he's eating the burger, and so it's well done. But there's others where people are just like, we're trying out this burger, and I saw one guy outside the Burger King in Leicester Square, and like it was just he said the burger was rock hard. It looked awful. And so it's a really interesting one, because you've got the Gordon Ramsay effect for Burger King, probably that halo effect, level up, but possibly maybe more of a risk for brand Ramsay in the fact that he's relying on 18-year-old college kids to perfect a Gordon Ramsay burger, where he's only screaming and shouting at people in a kitchen to get it right. Anyway, so it's a fascinating one. I don't know what you guys thought when you saw it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a perfect segue off the back of celebrities with the Chiefs, of Swift and the Chiefs, to then how do you utilize celebrities well as opposed to, say, creators. And it can be done really well, but tends to, from an advertising perspective, be really hard to integrate them into the ad so that it doesn't shine away from your brand and just go towards brand Ramsey. I think it's an amazing tactic for Burger King that have gone off the back of, from a product perspective, obviously taste being such a driver, but then product quality. They had the amazing campaign around the moldy burger.
Yeah.
And now they're going to high end, obviously still very affordable, but just high end, great taste. But yeah, it will be interesting to see how does that audience segment around millennials and whatnot respond to this type of collaboration. But I think it's a great result for Burger King.
I completely agree. And I think that I was reading a quote from their CMO, Katie Evans, who she obviously in response to the campaign was saying, so good you'd think a certain world-renowned chef had made it, but he didn't. Sorry, Gordon. And then I think, like, exactly to Dan's point, I think almost sort of, well, marrying a chef like Gordon Ramsay with a brand like Burger King, I think is, from a strategic angle, I think is absolutely brilliant. Because I think if you think back to incidents of the past where you have had world-renowned chefs that have gone head-to-head with fast food brands. So there was the Jamie Oliver with McDonald's incident quite a few years back where, again, sort of correlating that with Dan's point, obviously that was all around food quality, the benefits of it, et cetera, et cetera. I think when you've got then somebody, you know, as reputable in the sort of same caliber of chef, certainly from a sort of world-renowned perspective, championing your product and being the face of it to launch across this new campaign, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, and you know what? I would try it. Like, that alone, it would get me into a Burger King to try it because I'm fascinated just to go, what's this like? And it's like, it is affordable, but it's still pricey. I think it's like £13 for the burger.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the meal is 20 because they've got truffle fries. Well,
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry, I'm not risking fries. Due respect to the chefs. I would love to see a Gordon Ramsay impersonator go in and do like a Gordon Ramsay kitchen nightmare moment. Shut it down! Shut it down! That's so much they could do.
You're an English sandwich.
Yeah. Maybe that's what McDonald's could do. Like send in the Hamburglar.
The truffle fly.
Yeah. Look, really interesting. I want to say, lovely work by BBH. They seem to be on a roll creatively, don't they? As an agency, really, really strong. So, listen, guys, great to catch up. Thanks so much, and as always, great to have not just kind of interesting stories and our insights, which are always fascinating, but backed by the Tracksuit data. So yeah, we put links in to, I think we mentioned a few things, we put links in, and obviously go tracksuit.com. People can find out more there as well.
Cheers, Connor.
Awesome.
Great stuff. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Well, what another brilliant episode of The Singles with Dan and Jasper from Tracksuit. Any of marketers that are out there from brands that we talked about in today's episodes, I would love to give you the opportunity to hear your side of the story. And that's what is great about The Singles. We're using Tracksuit data, we're talking about hot topics, but we don't have all the answers. So would love to hear from marketers from any of those brands. Once again, thanks so much to Tracksuit for their support of The Singles. If you would like to find out more about Tracksuit and how you can have always on brand tracking for your brand, you can go to Go Tracksuit. And as always, thanks so much to Tracksuit for their partnership of The Singles. It wouldn't happen without their support. And if you would like to find out more about Tracksuit and how you can have always on brand tracking for your brand, or if you're an agency that wants to partner with Tracksuit, go to gotracksuit.com and you'll be able to find out more. And I have Dan and Jasper's contact details in the show notes, so go check them out on LinkedIn and they'll be more than happy to chat to you and just explore and show you the dashboard. It really is incredibly powerful, and I am able to say that due to my first-hand experience. That is it for this episode. As always, if you have enjoyed the episode and can share it with anybody, as I was saying at the start of the episode, all the algorithms are working against us at the moment. It's really hard to get organic reach anywhere, and we don't have budgets to be really paying and promoting as much as we would like. So your support helps. If you can share, you can like, you can rate or review, it really genuinely does help. I'm sure you hear it in other podcasts, and we all say it because it is true. So really appreciate you tuning in as always. From me, your host, Connor Byrne. Until the next episode, take